Welcome everyone. Hello. Today we have class 3 in our continuing series on the way to Buddhahood, looking at this modern classic by the great scholar and monastic Venerable Master Yin Shun. My name is Matthew Osborne and I'm tuning in here from Oxford, and I'm glad to see everyone who's joining us today. So as mentioned, we are continuing on with the subject of refuge. I was just thinking on this subject last night. I was watching a movie, and as most Hollywood movies go, you know, there's this sort of the plot's developing, and there's always like a crisis point at some point in the movie, right? The disaster, the sort of the bottoming out. All the characters, everything's bleak and everything's horrible. And it's Hollywood, so you know it's going to get better and everything's going to be solved. But in this particular movie, so one of the main characters, you know, everything's bleak and everything's horrible, and he's away sort of outside near the beach, and he begins to pray. So he prays to God, you know, make it all right, make it all right. So today when we're talking about refuge, I was thinking, you know, when we're thinking about what refuge is, it's a lot like the situation for that character there. Where do we turn to? Where do we ultimately try to find a support in life? And that's really what this whole idea of refuge is about. And last week we talked about a few of these other ideas. Common word in English in Buddhism is refuge, but we can also think about terms like sanctuary. I think that's another good idea as well. This kind of ultimate safe place where we know that we are supported and that we are safe and that everything's going to be all right. So let's continue on into the text. Here we go, back to our document here. We've already talked about some of the other sort of false forms of refuge, shall we say, seeking for refuge in worldly things, and even for things that aren't worldly, but they're not really ultimate. There might be other gods or minor deities or other things like that. And seeing that all of these are ultimately not going to be a complete support for us. And then we got into the 3 treasures, and that's, I think, where we got up to last week. We had a verse or two here, a single verse, the real refuge, the 3 treasures. And we were talking about 3 treasures as being the most ultimate and auspicious form of refuge. Now our text gets into the details, and it's going to go through the virtues, the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So let's just look into those. I think probably today we'll only have time to look at the first one, praise for the virtues of the Buddha. So let's jump on in. As usual, I'm going to read the Chinese first, and then we can get into the English and discuss that. And at certain points, I'll just make some comments and notes about some of the Chinese terminology here, particularly for those who have a stronger interest in Chinese Buddhism, and maybe you're learning Chinese or you're wanting to learn a bit more about the specific vocab. Okay, so verse number 5. 正法以为身, 净慧以为命, 智月良秋空, 离佛良祖尊. The true Dharma is his body, pure wisdom is his life. The full moon of knowledge shines in the autumn sky. Homage to the Buddha, foremost in the 2 perfections. So we've got these first 2 lines are talking about certain qualities of the Buddha. Now, it's kind of interesting when we do talk about the Buddha and the Buddha as a refuge. And in Mahayana Buddhism, you know, we talk about the different bodies of the Buddha. And I think this is quite an interesting point. And when we do read like some text or something that's talking about the Buddha, it kind of does help a lot actually to identify what is being referred to there, because sometimes it might be talking about this very like abstract sense, and that's what we actually see here in this the first opening lines here of this particular text. But at other times, as we're going to see just a little bit below, it might be referring to, say, that specific Buddha, say Shakyamuni Buddha, and like the Buddha as a human or the Buddha as a person in a particular place and time. So the text does make a distinction here, and it starts from the sense of really what we can call the Dharma body. It doesn't use the term Dharma body, which would be fasen, but it does say the true Dharma is his body. So I think that's pretty clear what's being referred to here. So this first idea, the true Dharma, 正法, Sadharma, it's an important idea. I mean, also when we talk about this word Dharma, it has so many different meanings here. But here with the true Dharma, we can say the right Dharma is also another apt translation for this. It's talking about these sort of ultimate principles of the world, or we can almost just translate it as like the truth itself. So in a certain sense, in a sort of an ultimate sense, the Buddha is the truth. And when we're talking about realizing Buddhahood, for example, or when we even take refuge in the Buddha, we're taking refuge in the Buddha as the truth. And you might think, well, isn't that the second refuge, the refuge of the Dharma? Well, it kind of is, in a way. But here it's just slightly a small step removed, in that why is the Buddha the Buddha? Because he has realized that true Dharma. He has realized the Sadharma. And that's what makes the Buddha the Buddha. And that realization is through the second line, 智慧以为命, right? Pure wisdom is his life. Now, we don't have like a word in Buddhism which is like wisdom life, or you might say like Dharma body. Actually, we do in Chinese Buddhism, now that I think of it. So, this idea of pure wisdom is his life, that should be a capitalized H there, shouldn't it, to match the first line. Also, this is another way of expressing the same principle of the Buddha as the Dharma body. So again, what makes the Buddha the Buddha? It is that wisdom, that insight. And when we think about even the word Buddha itself, which means like awakened one, someone who has woken up, that awakeness, right, as opposed to being in a dream. The dream is ignorance. Being awake is wisdom, is clarity. And there is a phrase in Chinese Buddhism there called Hui Ming, which often gets translated as wisdom life, comes from an expression ayusmant in Sanskrit. And that's used to refer to not just the Buddha, but actually many of his disciples as well. Maybe you're familiar with the Diamond Sutra. You would have heard of Hui Ming Shu Puti. So wisdom, life, Subhuti. And again, this indicates that the Buddha and his great disciples also have this sense of the essence, so to speak, is wisdom. When I say essence, don't take that too philosophically, just as a kind of a generic expression. So this is the first level of talking about the Buddha here. The Buddha as that person who has that wisdom which realizes the truth. The third line is a bit more poetic, right? The full moon of knowledge shines in the autumn sky. If we look at this in Chinese, actually, 子月亮秋空, that character Kong, which I've translated here as sky, is also the word for emptiness. So there's a bit of a play here. It's not just this, okay, the Buddha's like a moon in the autumn sky. Now, remember, it's that autumn moon, right, the harvest moon, that is usually considered like the brightest moon and also the largest moon. If you go out in like East Asian culture, you've got like autumn moon festival. You go out there and it's like, wow, the moon looks like huge and big today. It was actually just a full moon last night. If you went outside, I don't know if it's clear where you live. Around here, very clear, beautiful, big, bright moon. But the autumn moon is even brighter. And so here, that moon symbolizes the Buddha's full and complete wisdom, right? So it's a full moon, so it's full knowledge, full wisdom. And that wisdom is in the empty space, right? So it's the wisdom which realizes emptiness, is also part of this little metaphor here. The full moon of knowledge shines in the autumn sky. And then the last line, homage to the Buddha, foremost in the two perfections. Now this last phrase here, two perfections, is there's actually a couple of interpretations of this that are really quite different. If you read it in Chinese, 两足尊足 just literally means it's your foot. So 2 foot, he's the foremost of those with 2 feet. And this is, it sounds a bit unusual, but it's not as weird as it sounds. The idea that among all the different living beings in the world, basically it's humans and deities or gods that are kind of the higher beings, shall we say, as opposed to the lower types of living beings, suffering beings. And so within humans and deities, Buddhas are the foremost, they are the highest. So that's one interpretation. The other interpretation is 祖, also is part of a Chinese compound meaning something which is complete or even perfect. And so the Buddha is therefore the person who is foremost in the two perfections, or the two things that need to be completed. And again, there's different interpretations of what those two are, but the most common one would be wisdom and compassion. So the Buddha is foremost of all living beings in terms of wisdom and compassion. And again, that's what makes the Buddha the Buddha. Okay, let's just move on. That's the first line there. We've got a second verse. 三世佛无量，十方佛一儿，北愿来着世，离佛释迦文。Buddhas of the three periods are immeasurable. Buddhas of the 10 directions are also so, coming to this turbulent world due to his compassionate aspiration. Homage to the Buddha, Shakyamuni. Now the first two lines here are talking about, this is using what we might call a Mahayana cosmology, this idea that sort of existence isn't just like this sort of this single world, be it like this single planet or even this single solar system, or maybe even this single universe. There are like so many. It's like infinite in size, spatially, and in terms of time, it's also infinite from what goes before, present, and into the future. So, I mean, often there's various comparisons that are made with like the Big Bang Theory, and the universe starts at a certain point and maybe it will expand, and at a certain point it will contract into a big crush. But from Buddha's point of view, even that is not a starting point and an ending point. It's just going through these multiple expansions and contractions, or Buddhism doesn't use that word, but coming into existence, whole universes over billions and billions of years, and then they cease, and then another one, again and again and again and again. And spatially also, there's just infinite number of worlds. Now, when we first hear this, I think like Buddhas of the three periods, they're immeasurable, and Buddhas of the 10 directions. So Buddhas in time are immeasurable, Buddhas in space are immeasurable. I think, well, there's a lot of Buddhas. I should be bumping into them on the street wherever I go. But when you think about like the sort of scale of this, we still have to sort of then compare that and juxtapose that with the idea that still Buddhas are very rare. Just in our, short lifespans as human beings, we missed the last one by, almost 2,500 years. But actually, we're considered really close. Like if it was a lottery, we were actually very close. Most living beings exist at a time where just not even a memory of a Buddha. Could be so far from them. So we kind of have to justify that. But the main point here is that there are a lot of them, if we talk about in sort of ultimate terms. And that's talking about them, again, like I just said. So the three periods means past, present, and future, and the 10 directions are north, south, east, west, and then northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, above and below. So this is just the particular sort of way of expressing these ideas in India at that time, and they've been adopted also into Chinese. So time and space. And they come into this turbulent world due to their compassionate aspiration. So the idea being that Buddhas are reborn here out of compassion. They realize that they could just liberate themselves and free themselves from cyclical existence, but actually it's better if, well, it's not better, that's not really the point. They see that other living beings are suffering too, and they realize that they are in a position to help, and therefore their appearance in this world is also sort of specifically planned and designed to be of the greatest assistance to other living beings in that process. So if we go into sort of the story of Shakyamuni Buddha, I mean, billions of lifetimes as a bodhisattva, but then right near the very end, his lifetime before he appeared as Shakyamuni Buddha, he's in the heavens, in the Tushita heaven, and the stories say he's sort of observing the human realm and finding, okay, where's that perfect place to be reborn? Where are the perfect parents, perfect mother and father? I don't mean perfect here in the sense of that mother and father are themselves already liberated, but the ideal ones for, you know, the whole further development of these teachings, particular place, particular time, and then that bodhisattva chooses that specific place and time to be reborn in the world, knowing that that would be the sort of ideal environment so that their teachings will not only be best received, but will also continue on for generations afterwards. So that, again, that element of compassion there is really important. And then the last line for verse number 6, homage to the Buddha Shakyamuni. That's just pretty straightforward. So here, this last bit, this verse here is not talking about the Buddha in the abstract or the Dharma body, but it's saying that you've got immeasurable numbers of Buddhas, but in our particular case, it's Shakyamuni Buddha that we're referring to, and then one's paying respect to Shakyamuni Buddha. The term here that I've translated as homage is just li, which is a really broad term. Respect, it's probably a basic one. Now we do have another very common term that's used, and even in East Asia they just adopt the Sanskrit term, and the Sanskrit term is namaha, often it's namo, and that just gets transliterated into Chinese. Now they don't use that here, it uses li, but basically the idea is just the same. So when we say like Namo Buddhaya, so homage or respect to the Buddha, that Namo is exactly the same as when we use this word like namaste. Namas is just namaha, which means respect to or salutations to. Te is just you, so namaste is just respect to you. So here li for is also homage to Buddha. This is a translation in Chinese, rather than using the Sanskrit sound nam or to represent namaha, but the meaning is almost exactly the same. Okay, that's line 6. We've now got from the abstract Buddha is wisdom to the specific Buddha is Shakyamuni, and then we do have third and last verse for talking about the jewel of the Buddha, or the gem of the Buddha. Verse number 7. 智圆悲无极，断障无余习，三德等究竟，方便是差别. Again, there's a couple of concepts here, so we need to go a bit slower. I need to read the English first. Their wisdom is perfect, their compassion infinite. Overcoming all obstructions, they are totally without habitual residues. Equally ultimate with respect to these three virtues, but through skillful means, distinctions are shown. Okay. Now, just to sort of structure this, in line 3, it's talking about 3 virtues. So the 3 virtues are what I mentioned in the first 2 lines. The first one is their wisdom is perfect. The second virtue is compassion infinite. And the third virtue is overcoming obstructions without. So let's just go through these one by one. So this is talking about all the Buddhas here. This is not just talking about Shakyamuni Buddha. So for all the Buddhas, they are perfect in terms of their wisdom. So 智圆, literally, wisdom is round and full, but we can use the English term perfect or even complete. So we've already kind of mentioned that. That wisdom, of course, within the Buddhist traditions is analyzed and broken down into many different ways, and we can maybe talk about that a little bit later, in fact quite a bit later in the text, what is meant by wisdom and in what ways it's perfect. But let's just leave it here for now, I think, before we sort of jump the gun. The second one there is compassionate is infinite. Again, we've kind of already talked about this. Compassion being their driving motivation for appearing in the world. But of course, having that motivation to help living beings without the wisdom to be able to do it, I was going to say it's useless. It's not useless. Sometimes people say that, like, you know, compassion without wisdom is useless. I know, it's still not bad. I mean, compassion with, like, really bad ignorance, that's sometimes useless or even very damaging. But you don't need perfect wisdom for compassion to be useful or a good thing, okay? So don't think like that. It's a bit like sometimes people will say, you know, things like, oh, how can I help others if I'm still like, you know, not liberated myself, and therefore I need to fully liberate myself before I can help others. Well, you don't have to be fully liberated. I mean, do you have to be a liberated Buddha to help some old grandma or grandpa carry their groceries to their car from the supermarket? Of course you don't. So each of these, in any little increment within compassion or wisdom, is always beneficial. We don't have to perfect one before moving on to the second one. Okay, sorry, I'm getting off topic here. So we've talked about these first two already, wisdom and compassion. We've got the basic ideas. We will be talking about these later on in the text at numerous points. Let's have a look at this third one here though. So overcoming obstructions without habitual residues. So we've got this idea here, duan zhang. Now within particularly the Mahayana teachings, this idea of zhang is an obstacle or an obstruction, and duan means literally to cut off, but we can say overcoming if you like. Now there's different forms of obstacles. There are obstacles which are afflictions, right? So the afflictions are anger, craving, pride, jealousy, ignorance. These are all obstructions, and the Buddhas have removed those, have overcome them, destroyed them, if you will. So that's one kind, obstructions, which are the afflictions. The second kind of obstructions is a bit more subtle, and I'll just mention it very briefly, is obstructions to the knowable, which means that not only have the Buddhas removed all the afflictions, they have also removed these very subtle obstructions to understanding things fully and completely. So in short, to be an arahant, to just liberate oneself, you don't need to know that much, to be honest. Now don't misread me here. If you really genuinely can see the impermanence and the dissatisfactory nature of things, you'll let them go. Now, it's a fairly easy concept. Doing it's not easy. It's really difficult, but it's a very easy concept. But to become a Buddha, it's not enough to just know that all these phenomena are impermanent and dissatisfactory. You also need to know all the other qualities of those phenomena. And when you think about that, that's some serious knowledge and understanding there. So all the things that prevent us from understanding things in their completeness is one of these other obstructions. So obstructions to the knowable. And the third one are obstructions which are karma. So we've also, even Buddhas and arahants have still enacted various forms of karma in their past lives. So if we look at Shakyamuni Buddha as a bodhisattva, probably, like in terms of his virtue and compassion, probably quite well beyond anything that we've done. But he wasn't perfect yet, and that also meant that at various times he did some unskillful actions, which means he made some bad karma, and as a Buddha he sometimes experienced the results of those. So having a bad back from injuring and hurting someone in a past life is a single example. One time he was begging for food, he didn't receive any food, and that was from being particularly stingy in a past life, etc., etc. So these are all well-documented examples of the ways in which the Buddha, even as the Buddha, he's already liberated, but there were these still bad experiences he had from past actions. This third obstacle is then also the obstacles caused by our past karma. Now, when the Buddha encounters those, they're not actually obstacles to him anymore. From our point of view, we say that, well, the Buddha's got a backache, he's got a headache, that's an obstacle. But from the Buddha's perspective, it's not an obstacle. It's just this phenomena which is experienced. For us, however, right, the results of our past bad actions are obstacles. If we do something negative, get in a fight with somebody, the next thing you know, you have to interact with that person, and they don't want to interact with us, and that's an obstruction, right? That's really hindering what we need to do or something. That is an obstruction. So that is, in that sense, something that we need to overcome. And this last point is also connected with this idea of habitual residues. Again, this is a rather abstract concept, but it means that the Buddhas have not only removed their afflictions, so, anger, desire, ignorance, etc., etc., but they don't even have any what are called traces of them. And this is again comparing to the arahants, many arahants. So for example, it's recorded, quite well documented, Shariputra was wise, very wise. He was freed from all those afflictions, such as anger, for example. But in past lives, he did at certain times have a bit of an anger issue. And so sometimes his actions from the outside would look like he was angry, but in fact they weren't. But in terms of then his ability to interact with others, it might look like he does have anger. And again, this kind of distinction is a big distinction between the Buddhas and the Arahants, and something that we'll get into a bit later on. But this is also why the Buddha is a separate refuge. If we were talking about the qualities of the Buddha were just all the same qualities of the Arahants, then we wouldn't need the Buddha refuge. That would already be included within the refuge of the Sangha, which we're going to get to in a minute. Okay, so all these, wisdom, compassion, overcoming obstacles, all the Buddhas are equal in these regards. They have all reached the ultimate point of these: perfect wisdom, perfect compassion, perfect destruction of all these obstacles. However, through skillful means, distinctions are shown. So this means that while all Buddhas have these same qualities, they don't all look the same. They still have various other characteristics that make each Buddha unique and individual and distinct. So this is kind of, in terms of the important stuff, the spiritual aspects, wisdom, compassion, and so on and so forth, the ability to teach other living beings. The Buddhas, you can't say this Buddha's, Buddha A is more compassionate than Buddha B. Nope. Once you've reached the limit, I mean, the limit's the limit. However, they might look a bit different, right? They appear in different times and in different worlds. They do have other background things. They've also performed other different deeds on the Bodhisattva path. Therefore, the worlds that they experience and the other living beings that they encounter and teach are also different, right? So this last line is then sort of saying why we can talk about Buddhas in general, but we can also talk about individual Buddhas as well. Now, here, if we can come back to it, if we're talking about the Buddha as a refuge, right? It applies to all the Buddhas, right? When we're taking refuge in the Buddha, it's like the same when we take refuge in the Sangha, which we'll get to. It's not to say I take refuge in the Sangha and I think of the Sangha as my own particular religious community, my own particular Dharma group or Dharma community, or my own particular teachers. That is not the meaning of taking refuge in the Sangha. It is all within that category. Just as when we take refuge in the Buddha, we're taking refuge in all the Buddhas, likewise the Dharma and the Sangha as well. And one of the reasons why the way in which we take refuge in Buddha and Dharma and Sangha applies to all of them is because we're usually taking it in that somewhat more abstract sense of the Buddha as the person who has realized the truth, who has that wisdom to realize the truth, who has the compassion to then act on that wisdom to come and be of benefit to other sentient beings. And through that process, or within that process, they themselves have overcome these obstacles which would otherwise prevent them from being able to use that compassion or wisdom to be able to teach and help us. Right? If you had the wisdom and compassion, but you had absolutely no eloquence, you're just an absolutely terrible public speaker, how could you become a Buddha? How could you then, what we say, turn the wheel of the Dharma? Okay, that's about it for today. We've gone through 3 verses there. Again, it's something that we can reflect on and think about. And, if we are practicing Buddhists and when we're thinking about, taking refuge in the Buddha, you might do that every day. That might be part of your daily practice, Buddham saranam gacchami, or, zigui for, or whatever other language that you use. I should really learn this in Tibetan. It's not just saying it out the mouth. It's got to be something in our hearts. It's got to be something that we really then do. So I hope today's class give you something to think about there. And I hope after this class you're not rushing into something else. Give yourself a little bit of space to just reflect on these ideas, chew them over in your mind, let all these ideas like percolate down through us, because that's what a lot of Dharma practice is. It's easy to learn the principles, all conditioned phenomena are impermanent. Okay, I know that. I learned that already. You can learn that in your Buddhism 101 class. But to have that idea like percolate through everything so that whenever we see everything, we are seeing that all the time. That takes some work. So take the time afterwards, now or some other point, and reflect on what it means to take refuge in the Buddha. And that's your homework for today. and that's what I'm going to do in a moment. So thanks everyone, it's good to see you. We'll be continuing on next week where we look at refuge in the Dharma. So take care, stay good, stay happy, and just keep on going. And I'll catch you again next week. Bye-bye.